Hello, everyone. Today, I'm finally telling a true story from my real life. Please subscribe and stay with me till the end, because what happens at the end still hurts to remember.
You ever notice how a house can breathe even when nobody is inside it? I don't mean the wind slipping under the door or the pipes humming in the walls. I mean the way the rooms hold on to old sounds, the way silence can feel crowded when you've lived long enough to lose people. My name is Catherine, and before you ask, yes, I know I look calm. Old women learn to keep their faces still. We learn to hide storms behind wrinkles and routine. But if you came into my kitchen every morning, you'd see the truth in the smallest thing. I make 2 cups of tea, one for me and one for my granddaughter, Sophie. It's ridiculous, isn't it? A cup for someone who hasn't sat at my table in years. Yet my hands move on their own, like they belong to a different version of me, one who still expects her footsteps, one who still believes promises are stronger than distance. I boil the water, I place the sugar bowl where she liked it, I set the second cup across from mine as if the chair will suddenly remember its purpose, and then I sit, facing that empty space, pretending I'm not staring at a hole in my life. You might think I do it because I'm lonely, but loneliness is too simple a word. I do it because I'm afraid. I'm afraid that if I stop, it will mean I've accepted something I'm not ready to accept, that Sophie is not coming back, that my waiting has been foolish, that love doesn't guarantee return. Sophie left when she was young enough to still believe the world owed her something. She had that fire, that restless hunger in her eyes. She said she needed to build a life bigger than this small town, bigger than my quiet house, bigger than the smell of tea and old books. And I smiled like a supportive grandmother should. I told her she was brave. I told her she deserved the world. I hugged her so tightly she laughed and said, "Grandma, you'll crush me." I packed her snacks like she was going on a short trip, not walking away from the center of my days. She promised she would call every week. She promised she would visit on holidays. She promised she wouldn't forget me. At first, she didn't. Her calls came like little bursts of sunlight, fast stories, bright laughter, new friends, new streets, new plans. I'd sit with the phone pressed to my ear, smiling so hard my cheeks would ache, as if the muscles in my face could hold her close. But slowly, the calls became shorter. Then they became less frequent. Then they stopped. No fight, no goodbye, just a fading, like someone turning down the volume of my life until all I could hear was myself. And the worst part? I didn't know how to chase her without feeling ashamed. I didn't want to sound needy. I didn't want to be the old woman begging for attention. So I waited. I waited like waiting was dignity. I waited like silence was normal. And every morning I made 2 cups of tea, because it was easier than admitting I was terrified she had already forgotten the taste of home. Let me tell you something people don't say out loud. Waiting can become a habit so deep it starts shaping your body. It changes the way you breathe, the way you listen, the way you walk through your own house. After Sophie stopped calling, I became the kind of person who flinched at every sound. The mail slot clinking would make my heart jump. A car door outside would make me rush to the window. The phone vibrating, even for a useless advertisement, would send a rush of heat through my chest, like hope trying to resurrect itself. And every time it wasn't her, I'd feel that heat turn cold, spreading through my arms like disappointment has weight. I began leaving my phone on loud at night, even though the sound startled me awake sometimes. I told myself I was being practical, but the truth is, I was sleeping lightly, like a guard, like a woman who believed love might return if she stayed alert enough. You might wonder why I didn't just call her. I did, at first. I left messages that sounded cheerful. "Hello, darling, just checking in." I tried to keep my voice steady, like I wasn't counting the days. But when she didn't answer, I didn't keep calling. Pride again. Pride is a strange disease. It tells you that reaching out too much makes you weak, when really it just makes you human. Over time, my calls became less frequent too, not because I stopped caring, but because each unanswered ring felt like rejection. And rejection from someone you raised is a special kind of pain. Quiet, humiliating, poisonous. The house started to feel like a witness. The walls seemed to watch me pace. The kitchen clock ticked like it was scolding me for being alive when my world had stopped moving forward. I began talking to objects, not because I was losing my mind, but because objects don't abandon you. I'd say, "Not today," to the kettle when it whistled too sharply. I'd tell the curtains, "Stop moving," when the wind made them dance like ghosts. I'd whisper, "Be good," to the door when it creaked, as if it might scare away the last bit of my sanity. Some afternoons, I would walk into Sophie's old room. Yes, I kept it, don't judge me, and stand there like a visitor in a museum. The air in that room felt different, still holding her childhood. I could almost see her sitting on the floor with books spread around her, tongue between her teeth as she concentrated. I'd touch the edge of the shelf, feel the dust that settled like time itself, and my chest would tighten until it felt like breathing through cloth. And here's the part that makes it stressful, the part that makes it cruel. My mind wouldn't stay quiet. It kept asking questions it had no right to ask. Did I do something wrong? Did I love her too much? Did I not love her enough? Was I too strict, too soft? Did she leave because she needed freedom or because she needed escape? The curiosity wasn't gentle. It was sharp and anxious, digging at my memories like fingers scratching at a wound. I started remembering small moments and turning them into evidence against myself. A time I corrected her tone, a time I said no to something she wanted, a time I looked tired and maybe she thought she was a burden. You see what waiting does? It turns you into your own detective and your own criminal at the same time. And every morning, as the second cup of tea cooled across from me, I wondered if Sophie was somewhere out there drinking coffee with strangers, laughing, living, while I sat here in a house full of echoes, trying not to drown in questions. The first letter came on a day that looked ordinary enough to fool me. The sky was pale, the air smelled like rain that couldn't decide if it wanted to fall, and my hands were shaking slightly from the usual stress of nothing happening. That's the funny thing. After a while, nothing becomes exhausting. I opened a mailbox expecting bills, advertisements, the kind of paper that only exists to remind you you're still alive and still responsible. But there it was. A small envelope with no return address, no familiar handwriting, no name except mine, printed neatly like it had been typed by a machine. My heart started beating in my throat. I held it for a long moment, just staring, as if the envelope might bite. Part of me wanted to tear it open immediately, desperate for anything connected to Sophie. Another part of me wanted to throw it away, terrified that it would confirm my worst fears. I brought it inside like it was fragile, like it was a secret, and sat at the kitchen table where I always placed the second cup. The tea was still steaming. I remember thinking absurdly that Sophie would laugh at me for being dramatic about an envelope. Then I opened it. Inside was a photograph, faded, old, the kind of picture that has softened edges from being handled too many times. Sophie was in it, but not the Sophie I last saw. She was little, maybe 7 or 8, standing in my kitchen wearing an oversized sweater that swallowed her hands. She was holding a teacup with both palms like it was precious, like it was warmth itself. Her cheeks were round, her eyes bright and sleepy, and she looked safe in a way that broke me instantly. On the back of the photo were 3 words written in shaky ink. "Do you remember?" I don't know how long I stared. Minutes, maybe hours. The question wasn't innocent. It felt like a test. It felt like an accusation. Of course I remembered. I remembered everything. The way she used to wrinkle her nose at bitter tea, the way she'd steal biscuits and hide crumbs in her pockets, the way she'd lean her head against my shoulder when she thought nobody was watching. I remembered the nights she had nightmares and crawled into my bed trembling, and I'd whisper, I'm here, until she fell asleep again. So yes, I remembered, but the question wasn't about my memory. It was about hers. Did she remember me? Or did she only remember the comfort I gave her? Did she remember the way I loved her? Or only the way my house made her feel less alone? My hands began to shake harder. I pressed the photo to my chest, and the grief hit like a wave that had been waiting behind a wall for years. I cried quietly at first, the way old women do, because we've learned that loud crying feels embarrassing, like you're asking the world to witness your weakness. But then it grew heavier, and my breathing turned ragged. The stress of not knowing who sent it, why now, what it meant, wrapped itself around my ribs like wire. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept the photo on my bedside table, and I stared at my phone like it was an enemy. I was terrified it would ring, and terrified it wouldn't. I was curious in the worst way, curious like a person staring into a dark hole, knowing something terrible might be at the bottom, but unable to look away. Chapter 4: Dust and Dead Ends. After that photograph, I stopped pretending I was fine. I still smiled at the grocery store cashier, still nodded at neighbors like my life wasn't collapsing quietly behind my eyes. But inside my mind, something cracked open and refused to close again. You see, when you've been waiting for years, even a tiny sign feels like a door finally unlocking, except sometimes it doesn't lead to a room, it leads to a staircase going down into darkness. I became obsessed with finding out who sent that envelope. I checked the mailbox twice a day, then 3 times, then so many times that my knees started to ache from walking back and forth. I started opening drawers I hadn't touched in years, pulling out old papers, old letters, old receipts, as if Sophie's absence could be solved like a puzzle if I found the right missing piece. I found her childhood drawings, stick figures holding hands, a house with smoke curling from the chimney, a son that looked too happy to be real. I felt my throat tighten because she used to draw me bigger than everyone else, like I was the whole world. I found her school report cards and laughed once, bitterly, at a teacher's note that said, "Sophie is bright but easily distracted." Because distraction is what the world sells young people now, 1,000 shiny paths and none of them leading back home. I called her old friends, the ones whose numbers I still had. Some didn't answer, some answered and sounded uncomfortable, like my voice was a burden they hadn't agreed to carry. I haven't spoken to her in ages, they said. I think she moved, they said. I'm sure she's okay, they said. And I heard the same message behind all their words. Please don't make this real. Please don't make us feel responsible. I even called her workplace once. Yes, I know it was desperate. And the person on the other end said they couldn't share personal information. I hung up and stared at the wall like it had insulted me. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was stress, sharp and constant, like a headache that lived in my bones. I started sleeping in pieces, waking up at 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. with my heart racing as if I'd been running. I'd sit up in bed and listen to the house, convinced I heard something. Footsteps, breathing, the faint creak of a door opening. But it was always nothing. Always my own mind manufacturing noise because silence had become unbearable. Some days I'd stand in the kitchen holding that photograph and whisper, "Sophie, what are you doing?" Like she could answer through the air. And the worst part, the part I didn't admit to anyone, was the curiosity that turned cruel. I began imagining her life without me. I pictured her laughing with strangers, eating dinner at crowded tables, posting pictures I'd never see. I pictured her choosing not to call because she didn't want to, not because she couldn't. That thought made my stomach twist, my hands go cold. I hated myself for thinking it, but I couldn't stop. That's what stress does. It takes your love and turns it into suspicion. And still, every morning I made 2 cups of tea because stopping felt like surrender, and surrender felt like dying while I was still breathing.
The second letter came exactly when my nerves were stretched thin enough to snap. I remember the day too clearly because trauma has a way of printing itself into your memory like ink you can't wash off. It was raining, steady and gray, the kind of rain that makes the world feel smaller. I opened the mailbox and saw an envelope that looked different. Thicker paper, printed address, a stamp that wasn't from my town. My fingers went numb before I even read it. I stood there in the rain like an idiot, holding it as if the water might dissolve the truth inside. When I finally stepped into the kitchen, my hands shook so badly I could barely tear it open. It was from a hospital in the city Sophie once described to me as beautiful, the city she said would change her life. The letter was written in polite language, careful language, the kind that tries to sound gentle while delivering a knife. It said Sophie had been admitted weeks ago. It said there had been an emergency contact listed, my name, my relationship, my address, but the phone number was incorrect. 1 digit wrong. One tiny mistake that suddenly felt bigger than death itself. The letter said they had tried to reach me. It said they couldn't. It said Sophie had asked for me. Those words, asked for me, burned so hot, I thought my chest might split open. I read them again and again, like repetition could change them. Then my eyes fell to the sentence that mattered most, the sentence that made the room tilt. Sophie had passed away. I don't remember standing up, but I remember being on the floor. I remembered the sound I made, not a scream exactly, more like my body was emptying itself of air and hope at the same time. I remember staring at the kitchen tiles, noticing a tiny crack near the edge, and thinking absurdly that I should fix it. That's what shock does. It makes you focus on nonsense because the truth is too large to hold. I crawled to the table, gripping the chair leg like I was drowning. My tea was still there, 2 cups. The second cup was still steaming, like it hadn't gotten the message yet. I wanted to throw it, smash it, destroy something, because I couldn't destroy what had happened. But I didn't. I just sat there, shaking, reading the letter again like it might suddenly say, "We made a mistake." It didn't. I felt stress rise in my body like poison, hot, suffocating, uncontrollable. My heart raced, my hands tingled, my mouth went dry. I tried to breathe and it felt like my lungs were too small. And then guilt arrived. Not slowly, not gently, but like a fist. Because Sophie had asked for me, she had wanted me, and I wasn't there. Not because I didn't love her, but because life is cruel and pride is stupid, and one wrong digit can erase a goodbye. I kept whispering, "No, no, no," to the empty kitchen, as if the walls could argue with death. But the walls only watched. The clock kept ticking, and the rain kept falling, as if the world had decided her life was just another day. Chapter 6. The weight of if. After the hospital letter, time stopped being time. It became a fog I moved through without direction, without purpose, without any sense that tomorrow mattered. People say grief comes in waves, but nobody tells you the waves can be made of guilt. Guilt is heavier than sadness, because sadness lets you cry, but guilt makes you punish yourself. I kept replaying every moment of the past few years, like I was trapped in a courtroom inside my own head. If I had updated my number sooner, if I had visited her city, if I had called more often, if I had been brave enough to sound needy, I imagined Sophie in a hospital bed, pale under harsh lights, staring at the door like a child waiting for someone to pick them up. I imagined her checking her phone, seeing no missed calls, thinking I didn't care. That image tortured me until I felt sick. I couldn't eat. Food tasted like ash. I couldn't sleep because every time I closed my eyes, I saw that door, that empty hallway, that lonely waiting. Stress lived in my body like an illness. My hands shook when I tried to pour water. My chest tightened randomly, like my heart was panicking on its own. I'd walk into a room and forget why I was there. I'd sit down and feel my thoughts spin until I had to stand again. I tried praying, but the words wouldn't come out right. I tried asking God for peace, but what I really felt was rage. Rage at the world for taking her, rage at Sophie for not calling, and rage at myself for being so proud and so foolish. I hated myself for being angry at her because she was gone, and anger at the dead feels like cruelty. But grief isn't polite. Grief is messy, selfish, sharp. It asks questions with no answers. It demands explanations from people who can't speak anymore. I went through her old room again and again, touching the walls like they might hold her pulse. I sat on her bed and felt the mattress dip under my weight, and I thought, this is the closest I'll ever be to her again. I kept hearing her voice in my memory, not the adult voice I barely knew, but the child voice calling Grandma from the hallway. That voice became a weapon. It made me remember the promises I made to protect her, to be there for her, to love her no matter what. And yet, in her final days, she was alone. The guilt made my stomach knot, made my head ache, made my body feel older than it ever had. And still, this is the part that scares me. I kept making tea. 2 cups. Not because I believed she would return anymore, but because stopping felt like admitting I failed her. The second cup became my punishment. I would watch it cool, watch the steam disappear, and I would whisper into the empty chair, "I'm sorry," until my throat hurt. You might think grief would soften over time, but sometimes it doesn't soften. Sometimes it hardens into a shape you learn to carry. And I was learning, painfully, how to carry mine.
I went to the city for the funeral, and I want you to understand something before I describe it. There are pains in life that don't scream, they whisper. And that whisper can be worse because it follows you everywhere. The funeral home smelled like polished wood and flowers that were trying too hard to look alive. I walked in with my hands clasped so tightly my fingers ached, because if I let go, I thought I might fall apart in front of everyone. People were already there, standing in small groups, murmuring softly like the building itself demanded quiet. And that's when it hit me. I didn't recognize most of them. These were Sophie's people, co-workers, neighbors, friends I'd never met. They looked at me with sympathy, with that careful expression people wear when they're afraid grief might splash onto them. Someone hugged me and said, "You must be her grandmother." And I nodded, because what else could I do? I wanted to say, yes, I'm the one who made tea for her every morning even when she stopped calling. But that sounded insane, so I stayed silent. I walked up to the casket and saw her face, and my brain rejected it instantly. She looked like Sophie, but also not like Sophie. Too still, too quiet, like someone had turned her into a photograph. I stood there and waited for her eyelids to flutter, for her lips to twitch into that little smile she used to give me when she wanted forgiveness. Nothing happened. The finality was a physical thing, like a wall slammed down inside my chest. During the service, people spoke about her kindness, her determination, her talent. They said she was full of potential, which is a polite way of saying the world stole her before she finished becoming herself. A friend of hers, young, trembling, said Sophie used to talk about my tea, about my house, about the smell of cinnamon and warmth. She said it was the only place she ever felt safe, the girl whispered, and I almost broke right there because safe is what I tried to be for her. Safe was my job, and yet she died without me. After the service, they handed me a small bag of her belongings, and I held it like it weighed more than my entire life. A cracked phone, a thin wallet, a notebook. I wanted to open the notebook immediately, but my hands wouldn't obey. My body was still in shock, still trying to survive the fact that my granddaughter had become a memory. Outside, the city moved like nothing had happened. Cars rushing, people laughing, life continuing. That was the most stressful part, you know? The world doesn't stop for your grief, it keeps going. And you're forced to keep breathing in a universe that no longer makes sense. I walked back to my hotel room that night and sat on the edge of the bed holding Sophie's bag, staring at it like it was a living creature. I didn't cry much. I couldn't. I felt hollow, like my tears had been used up by the waiting. Chapter 8. The House That Accuses. When I returned home, my house felt different, as if it knew. The air was colder, even though the heater was on. The walls seemed to lean inward, watching me. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, And for a moment, I expected to hear Sophie's voice calling, "Grandma!" like she had surprised me, like this was all a mistake. But there was nothing, just the familiar quiet, now sharpened into something cruel. I placed her belongings on the kitchen table, and the second cup of tea sat there like a joke the universe was making at my expense. I stared at it until my eyes burned. I wanted to throw it into the sink, smash it, scream, do something that matched the chaos inside me. But instead, I sat down, because old grief doesn't always explode. Sometimes it just presses down until you can't stand. That night, I didn't sleep in my bed. I slept on the couch because the bedroom felt too intimate for a world where Sophie was dead. I kept waking up with my heart racing, convinced I heard someone walking down the hall. Stress lived in my muscles now, tightening my shoulders, clenching my jaw until my teeth hurt. I started cleaning obsessively, not normal cleaning, scrubbing, polishing, rearranging, wiping the same counter again and again, like if I made the house perfect, maybe I could undo the mess inside me. I washed the teacups until my hands were red. I folded blankets that didn't need folding. I opened cupboards and closed them just to hear a sound that proved I still existed. And every time I passed Sophie's old room, my chest tightened like a hand squeezing my heart. I finally went in and sat on the edge of her bed. The mattress dipped under my weight, and I thought, this is the closest I will ever be to her again. I pressed my palm against the blanket and whispered her name like a prayer. Sophie. Saying it out loud made it real in a way I wasn't ready for. I began talking to her as if she were sitting beside me, because my mind refused to accept a world where I couldn't speak to her. I told her I was sorry. I told her I didn't know. I told her I waited too long. I told her I loved her so much it scared me. And then I got angry, quietly, shamelessly, because part of me wanted to ask why she didn't fight harder to come home. But then guilt crushed that anger immediately, because she was gone, and it was unfair to demand strength from someone who was drowning. I felt trapped between love and blame, between grief and regret. That is the most painful kind of stress, when your own heart becomes a battlefield. The house became an accomplice to my suffering. Every object reminded me of her: a spoon, a chair, a shadow on the wall. I couldn't escape it. I realized then that grief doesn't just live inside you, it moves into your home, rearranges your life, and sits down at your table like an unwanted guest. And still, in the morning, my hands reached for the kettle. Still, I made 2 cups. A week later, I did the thing I'd been avoiding because I knew it would break me. I turned on Sophie's phone. The screen lit up slowly, cracked like a spider web, and for a second I felt ridiculous, like I was about to invade her privacy. But grief doesn't respect boundaries. Grief is desperate. My fingers hovered over the passcode screen, and I tried the one I remembered from her childhood, her birthday, and it worked. That small success made me nauseous because it meant she hadn't changed everything. She had kept something of herself the same. I opened her messages first, then her notes, then her drafts. And that's where I found them. Words she wrote but never sent. Messages to friends that began with, "I'm not okay," and ended with nothing, as if she ran out of strength mid-sentence. Lists of things she needed to do: pay rent, buy groceries, call grandma. That last one appeared again and again like a haunting. Call grandma, call grandma, call grandma. Each time she had typed it like a promise to herself, and each time she hadn't done it. I scrolled until my eyes blurred. Then I found a draft addressed to me. It began, "Grandma, I'm sorry I disappeared." I read it once, then again, because it felt impossible that her voice was alive inside this dead phone. She wrote about being overwhelmed, about feeling like she was failing, about being ashamed that her dreams weren't coming true the way she'd imagined. She wrote, "I didn't want you to hear my sadness because you always tried so hard to make me happy." That line stabbed me. I had wanted to protect her from pain, and in doing so, I had made her hide it. Another draft was shorter. "I miss you more than I can admit." Another, I'm scared. The simplest words were the most devastating because fear is not dramatic, it's human. And then I found the last one, dated 2 days before she died. It was only a few lines, but it felt like the final breath of someone reaching for home. If you're reading this, I didn't make it home. Please don't hate me. Please don't stop making tea. It's the only place I ever felt safe. I dropped the phone onto the table like it had burned me. I covered my mouth with both hands and made a sound that wasn't quite a sob, more like my body breaking in half. Safe. That's what I was to her. Not a judge, not a critic, not a burden. Safety. And she died believing she didn't deserve to return to safety because she wasn't successful enough. I cried until my head throbbed and my chest hurt. I cried for the little girl in the photograph holding the teacup. I cried for the woman in the hospital bed waiting for a door that never opened. I cried for myself too, because love is supposed to save people, isn't it? But sometimes, love is just a light in the distance, and the person you're trying to reach is too tired to walk toward it. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with 2 cups of tea, one cold, one untouched, and I whispered into the empty chair, "I would have taken you back in any condition, Sophie, any condition." But the chair didn't answer, and the stress of that silence felt like it might kill me next. Chapter 10. Tea Under the Tree. I wish I could give you a neat ending, a lesson that makes everything feel worth it. But life doesn't wrap grief in a ribbon. It just leaves it in your hands and expects you to keep living. After I read Sophie's drafts, something in me changed. The guilt didn't disappear, but it shifted. It became quieter, heavier, like a stone I'd have to carry forever instead of a blade cutting me every second. I stopped making 2 cups every morning. At least, I tried to. The first morning, I forced myself to make only one. My hands trembled so badly I spilled tea on the counter. I stood there staring at the spill, and I realized I wasn't just breaking a habit, I was breaking a promise I'd made to myself that if I kept the second cup ready, Sophie might return. Without it, the house felt too honest. But Sophie's words echoed in my mind. Please don't stop making tea. So I found a way to keep the ritual without letting it destroy me. Now, some mornings I make 1 cup for myself and pour a little into the second cup, not to pretend she's coming home, but to honor that she once belonged here. Then I take it outside, into the yard, to the old tree where she used to sit with her homework. That tree has watched my life unfold quietly, season after season, never judging, never leaving. I place the cup at its roots like an offering, and I sit on the porch steps and talk to Sophie like you're listening to me now. I tell her about the weather. I tell her the neighbor's cat had kittens. I tell her the roses bloomed late this year. I tell her I'm angry sometimes, and I'm sorry for that too. I tell her I forgive her. I tell her I forgive myself, though that one is harder. Some days the stress still comes back like a wave, sudden and choking. I'll be washing dishes and suddenly I can't breathe because I remember she died waiting for me. I'll hear a laugh outside and my heart will leap before it remembers the truth. That's what grief does. It tricks you into hope, then punishes you for it. But I've learned something I wish I'd learned sooner. Love should be loud while people are alive. Love should be inconvenient. Love should be embarrassing. Love should make you call first, even if your pride screams not to. Because pride doesn't sit beside you when you're old and alone. Pride doesn't hold your hand at funerals. Pride doesn't warm a second cup of tea. And sometimes, when the sky turns soft in the evening and the sun falls through my kitchen window just right, I swear I can feel Sophie's presence, not as a ghost, but as a memory that refuses to be erased. The story doesn't end with peace. It ends with me choosing to keep breathing anyway, to keep living in a house full of echoes, and to answer that question she left behind. Do you remember? Yes, Sophie, always. And I'm sorry that remembering is all I have left.
Thank you for listening to my story and for learning the lesson it carries. If this story touched you and you liked the video, please subscribe to the channel and stay connected for more true stories based on real-life experiences.